Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Skeleton. Today we've got 10 true creepy encounters from truckers. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. Most winters, I stuck to a familiar stretch. Duluth down to Cheyenne, same load types, same truck stops, same overnight routines. But a week before Christmas, dispatch called and told me they had a last-minute run. Northbound this time. Missoula. I paused. Missoula in December? Not ideal. Before I could say anything, they added, double pay, double pay. That'll shut down a lot of doubts real fast, so I took it. Didn't argue. The rig was already prepped. I'd just finished a food service haul, and the dry van they hooked up was like a couple old vending machines, some random furniture pieces. Nothing temperature sensitive. No reefer unit humming in the background, just quiet steel. I crashed for a few hours in the cab, then loaded up on caffeine and hit the road just after 2 in the morning. That part of Montana is no joke in the winter. Long stretches with no lights, no towns, and barely any shoulder. You start seeing weird things when you're alone out there too long. Snowbanks that look like buildings, road signs you swear are closer than they actually are. The wind gets inside your head. Still, I've handled worse. About 50 miles outside Havre, I noticed a pair of taillights ahead. They were pretty far up, just hovering out there in the dark. Too distant to catch, but enough to keep in view. Honestly, I was kind of glad to see them. Company, even at a distance, makes the road feel less empty. But something about the way those lights moved didn't sit right. The road started curving, and the taillights didn't. They kept going straight. I'd take a bend and watch them drift sideways, like they were hovering above the snow instead of riding asphalt. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, thought maybe I was just tired, zoning out. Tried flipping on the radio to wake myself up. Static. Not unusual in remote areas, but I scanned through every channel, AM, FM, even the weather band. Nothing but white noise. Not even a weak signal fading in and out, just solid, hissing static. I sat there gripping the wheel, staring out into the black, trying not to focus too hard on those lights that didn't seem to obey the same road I was on. They vanished just after 4:30. And right then, the CB crackled. First sound I'd heard from it since the interstate. Just a low hiss at first, and then a voice. Quiet, dry, close. Pull off. 2 words. No call sign, no chatter, no click afterward. Just that whisper. And it didn't even sound like it came through the speaker. It sounded like it came from inside the cab, right next to my ear. I jerked the wheel a little out of reflex and looked over my shoulder. Nothing there. I kept driving. What else could I do? The sun started bleeding over the horizon a couple hours later. Orange light, pale snow. That endless flatness Montana's known for. That helped a little. Made things feel more normal. Until I passed this old gas station I remembered from a run the year before. Usually there's a plow truck or two parked there, a maintenance guy refilling a thermos, maybe an old Jeep from one of the ranches nearby. But that morning, the lot was empty. I slowed down anyway, because parked behind the building, mostly hidden from the road, was a rig. Same make and model as mine. Same company name stamped on the side. Same color even. I hadn't passed another truck since I'd left the main drag hours ago. I pulled into the lot, circled around slow, figured maybe it was one of ours, maybe someone needed help. But as I got closer, something felt off. The cab was empty. No one inside. No footprints leading to or from it. The snow around the wheels was untouched. And the trailer door? It was cracked open. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough to see the frost clinging to the hinges. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to decide if I should check it out or just keep going. Then I got out. I wish I could explain why. Curiosity? Habit? Some dumb instinct? I climbed up, swung the trailer door the rest of the way open. The inside was empty. Too empty. Not just recently unloaded, Empty. The floor was smooth, dry, clean. No tire tracks from dollies. No scratches from pallets. Not a single mark, like no freight had ever touched it. Except for one thing. At the far end, bolted to the wall, was a single folding chair. And sitting on that chair, a pair of gloves. My gloves, old, beat-up leather ones. Left one had a tear in the thumb from when I slipped with a box cutter. Right one was stained from grease and God knows what else. One palm was scorched, a little burn mark from a welding job I helped out on years ago down in Tonopah. I stood there staring, trying to make it make sense. I didn't drop them. I didn't loan them to anyone. I hadn't even seen them in over a year. They were mine, no question. I backed out of the trailer, didn't touch the gloves, slammed the door, and got back in my truck. Didn't call it in, didn't tell anyone. I just drove. Tried to put it out of my mind, but 20 minutes later, the heater quit. No warning, just stopped. Fans still ran, but no heat. Outside it was maybe 12 degrees, maybe less. I tapped the dash, recycled the ignition. Nothing. Then the headlights blinked off, both of them. 2 full seconds. I sat in total darkness with just the hum of the tires. Then they came back, clean, like someone flipped a switch. By the time I hit the next rest stop just outside Harlem, I was running on nerves and caffeine fumes. I pulled in next to a salt truck, turned off the engine, and reached for my phone. No service. I got out to stretch my legs, maybe wave my phone around and catch a signal, and that's when I saw it. The same white rig, 2 spots down. Same model, same paint, same everything. But this time, the driver door was open, just a sliver. And the dome light inside, it blinked once, dim and slow, like it was running out of power. Then, nothing. What really got me, though, was the side mirror. It was pointed directly at my cab. I didn't go over. Didn't even move. Just got back in my rig, locked the doors, and sat there until the sun came up. Pretended to sleep. I didn't even blink much. When I finally rolled into Missoula, I backed the trailer into the dock, signed off the delivery, and told dispatch I was done for the year. They didn't argue. Just nodded like they'd seen it before. 2 days later, I pulled the dash cam footage. Just out of curiosity, really. Wanted to prove to myself it was all in my head. Most of the video looked normal. Snow, trees, empty road. But then, scattered throughout only for a second or two at a time, the screen would cut to black. And in those moments, you could see something faint. A figure, standing behind me in the cab. I shut the footage off. I changed trucks a week later. I don't run solo anymore. And I haven't touched a northern route since. Now, if I ever see a white truck parked where it shouldn't be, I don't stop. I just keep driving. I just picked up a short overnight haul out of Cheyenne, heading west through Wyoming towards Salt Lake. It was supposed to be an easy run one of those late-night freight gigs where you load up, get rolling, and knock out a few hours of quiet highway before sunrise. I'd done that stretch so many times I could picture it with my eyes closed. But that night, the snow came early and fast. Dispatch had called and told me to hold off, maybe wait until morning. They were already seeing closures farther west and visibility warnings all along the I-80s. But the payout was decent, the load was light, and I've always had a hard time turning down a job once I've committed. I figured I'd be careful, take it slow, and push through. About an hour in, something caught my eye through the blur. It was a pair of blinking hazards up ahead, maybe a quarter mile down, just far enough that I couldn't make out the vehicle yet. The road was dead otherwise. I hadn't seen another rig in at least 45 minutes. When I got closer, I saw it was a box truck pulled off onto the shoulder, half in the ditch. Not jackknifed, not wrecked, just crooked, rear doors wide open. I slowed almost to a stop, rolled past it slowly, and saw someone standing behind the truck holding a flashlight. He was waving, not frantically, just trying to get attention. I pulled over maybe 100 feet up the road and threw on my own hazards. As I stepped out of the cab, the cold hit me hard. The wind was cutting sideways, snow piling fast. My boots crunched deep into the slush as I walked back toward the truck. The guy looked to be in his mid-40s. No gloves, no hat, just jeans and a black winter jacket zipped halfway up. His face was pale, skin raw from the wind. "Thanks for stopping," he said right away, like we were already in the middle of a conversation. "Been out here a while." He told me his partner had gone to find help after the truck spun off trying to dodge a deer, said the engine died not long after. They were carrying a light load, nothing hazardous, just small parcels, and they didn't want to leave it unattended. I offered to let him sit in my truck, warm up while I radioed for a tow. He shook his head. "Appreciate it, but I should stay with the cargo," he said, glancing back at the open trailer. "Company gets picky about that sort of thing." He asked if I had a flashlight, said his was dying. I handed him mine and followed him to the rear of the trailer. He clicked it on and pointed it inside. "You mind helping me check for damage real quick?" he asked. "Just want to make sure nothing slid around." I nodded and stepped up into the trailer. It was mostly empty. No pallets, no packages that I could see. Just a damp floor and a line of wet footprints leading from the rear up to the front wall. In the far corner, there was a gray moving blanket, crumpled like someone had tossed it aside in a hurry. I took a few steps forward. The metal floor was slick under my boots. I squatted near the blanket and pulled it back, expecting maybe a loose box or piece of equipment under it. But there was nothing there. No damage, no gear. Just that weird strip of footprints and the empty, echoing interior. When I turned around to tell him, the trailer was empty. He was gone. My flashlight was on the floor where he'd been standing. I climbed down, boots sliding a little as I hit the snow. The road was empty. No movement, no sound except the wind pushing snow sideways. I scanned both directions. Nothing. Not even new footprints in the snow. Just mine, already starting to blur. Trying to stay calm, I walked back to my rig, half expecting to see him inside. Maybe he'd taken me up on my offer after all. But the passenger side was empty, and the door was unlocked. I never leave that door unlocked. I check it every time I stop. It's muscle memory. Something about that really unsettled me. Not the guy disappearing, not the weird footprints, but that small specific thing being wrong. It felt off. And then I heard the CB. It was crackling. Not loud, just a low hiss at first. I hadn't touched it since Cheyenne. I leaned forward, saw the dial had shifted. It wasn't on my usual channel. "Breaker, breaker," a voice said. "You still with me, brother?" Same voice. Exact same voice as the guy I'd just been talking to. I didn't answer. Didn't breathe for a second either. I just reached over and shut the radio off. And then I drove. The snow was coming down harder now, reducing visibility to barely a truck length. My wipers couldn't keep up. I had to lean forward, squinting, just to stay between the vague outlines of the road. 30 miles later, I saw another set of hazards blinking ahead. Same type of box truck. Same faded company logo on the side. Same scrape along the passenger panel. This one was pulled farther off the road into the snowbank. Both doors were open. No one inside that I could see at first. No tracks in the snow. Nothing moving. Then, as I rolled past slow but steady, I saw a shape slumped in the passenger seat. Could have been a jacket, could have been a body. I didn't stop to find out. I kept going, hands gripping the wheel tight, trying not to let my mind spiral. By the time I made it to Evanston, it was just past 4 in the morning. I pulled into a truck stop I'd been to before, parked near the edge of the lot, and sat there for a few minutes before I even cut the engine. Inside, the heat hit me like a wave. My face burned from the contrast. I walked up to the counter, still half numb, and told the woman working what I'd seen. She didn't react. Just looked at me like I'd said something about the weather. "That truck shows up when storms roll in," she said, matter of fact. "You ain't the first." I blinked at her. "What do you mean?" She poured a coffee without looking up. 6 years ago, delivery truck slid off near Lyman. 2 guys inside. Tried to hike out after the CB died. Neither made it. Locals found their bodies a few days later, frozen solid not half a mile from the wreck. She handed me the coffee and added, "Since then, people see 'em. Always in the snow. One waves you down. says he's waiting on a partner, sometimes asks for a flashlight. And then, I asked. Then they disappear, she said. Next rig that goes missing is found with the doors open. Radio still hissing. I didn't say much after that. Just sat down and drank the coffee slowly, trying to shake the cold from my chest. The heat helped, but not enough. Not in the way I needed. When I finished, I went back out, triple-checked every lock, and left the engine running while I slept. Since then, I've never taken that stretch in winter again. I've been driving long-haul routes out of Riverton since my early 20s. For the last few winters, I've been running the upper corridor through the west, winding up near Brenton, then circling back with whatever return freight they had waiting. I knew the job, I knew the roads, and I definitely knew winter. Black ice, whiteouts, spinouts, I'd seen them all more than once. My hands didn't even flinch anymore when I hit a patch that made the trailer fishtail. Instinct took over. That's not bravado, it's just muscle memory built over thousands of hours and a whole lot of close calls. That winter, I was trying to avoid the interstate through Montclair. Construction was a mess, and it felt like every other mile had a jackknife trailer or a pileup. The back roads weren't pretty, but they were quieter. I could get into a rhythm without all the sudden stops. That's what I told myself anyway. The load was a simple 1-4 pallets of flash-frozen produce out of eastern Riverton, bound for a depot just outside of Brenton. I left just after sunrise, tank full, truck clean, GPS humming along. The forecast mentioned a sharp cold front dropping in overnight, but I figured I could outrun it if I kept moving. Clear skies in the morning. Roads dry. Everything lined up just fine. By the time the sun dipped, I was already north of Grafton, easing into that familiar county highway that slices west past the farmlands. I'd taken it more times than I could count. It was never scenic, just long stretches of nothing punctuated by old fence posts and the occasional grain silo. No reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. But then my GPS said I had 50-some miles until the next turn, and suddenly my dash cam showed a fork in the road I didn't recognize. Just ahead, the blacktop split. No signs, no warning. The main road was supposed to continue straight, but here it tilted off to the left, a gentle curve that looked just wrong. It caught me off guard, not because roads can't change, but because this one looked too new, too clean. The line paint was unscuffed, the surface hadn't cracked from the freeze yet, and someone had already driven it. There were tire tracks, light but clear, pressing through the top layer of snow. No alerts came through the radio. Nothing on the app, just a new road, out of nowhere. So I took it. 10 minutes later, I passed that fence. Not just any fence, a busted slat with a red piece of fabric caught on the wire. It was distinct. Someone had torn through it, or maybe something. The red stood out in the snow like a flare. Then I passed it again. Same break. Same ragged piece of cloth. I hadn't made a turn. The road had been straight the whole time. I knew what I was seeing, and I knew what it meant. I stopped the truck, climbed down. The air felt like it was trying to shove me back into the cab, bitter and fast, the kind of cold that goes for your bones. My boots hit the ground, and the snow didn't even crunch right. It was too powdery, like ash. I walked to the fence and ran a gloved hand over the broken wood. Still splintered, still sharp. That same red shred fluttered in the breeze. Torn from a coat, maybe, or a blanket. No cars behind me, no lights ahead. The road stretched on, silent and blank. I climbed back in and tried to reset the GPS manually. It froze, blinked, and went black. The screen stayed dark. I should have turned back right then, but reversing a semi in snowblind conditions wasn't an option. I pressed forward. I told myself it would all reconnect eventually, but my odometer didn't match what I felt. I had driven what felt like another 30 miles, maybe more, but the system said 12, and I believe it. Because that stretch, it didn't behave like a normal road. I started seeing these lights, orange, flickering, way out past the ditches. Looked like lanterns or flares maybe. I figured it was emergency crews or a plow team staged out there, but they didn't move. I passed 3 of them. Each one just stood there glowing in the dark, no poles or wires. No sign they were attached to anything at all. Then the pavement gave way. No warning. The blacktop crumbled into packed gravel, then compacted snow. I dropped speed, easing into 20. The tires adjusted. The ride got bumpier. And then I saw him, middle of the road, just standing there. He wore a reflective jacket, the kind highway workers use, but his arms just hung at his sides. No gloves, no hat, no flashlight. I hit the horn, a full blast. He didn't even blink. I flipped the brights on. Nothing. I pulled the window down a crack and called out, "You okay?" His mouth moved, but no sound came out. That's when I knew something was wrong in a way that didn't make sense. I killed the engine and climbed down. The cold hit harder than before. My teeth hurt. My skin tried to crawl back under the layers. But I moved toward him anyway, keeping my hands up like I was approaching a stray dog. "You stranded?" I said. "You need help?" He didn't speak. He just pointed behind me. I turned around. No truck, no road, just white. The tire tracks behind me stopped 20 feet out, and beyond that, nothing. No lights, no cab. Just a sheet of snow, smooth and untouched. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran back toward where the truck should have been. But my boots didn't leave prints. I could feel my legs hitting the ground, but nothing marked the snow. I spun around. The man was gone. Then I noticed the flames again, 3 of them now, close. Close enough that I could feel heat without feeling warmth. They circled me, perfectly spaced. No smoke, just flickering fire. And then I heard him, not in front of me but behind my right ear. Do it again. You know the order. I whipped around, empty. But my arms moved without me. They raised, reached out, grabbed nothing. I stepped forward, bent my knee, pulled into an invisible cab. My body knew the motions like muscle memory. I shut an invisible door, and the windshield appeared. I was back in my seat, GPS humming. Heater on. Odometer said I'd moved 6 miles in the last 2 hours. Dashcam? Static. Nothing between the fence and now. I didn't stop again. Not that night. Not until daylight. When I rolled into the Brenton Depot, I offloaded in silence, signed the sheet, and booked a room at the nearest place with a key and a lock. That night I kept waking up, heart pounding, half convinced the headlights were still on and the snow was still there, stretching out forever. Now, I stick to the main roads. I don't care if I sit through 2 hours of gridlock. I don't care if I have to crawl through slush behind a salt truck. If I see a fork in the road that wasn't there last time, I don't take it. I keep going straight. I was 38 when this happened. At the time, I was still driving long haul from Linton to Merrill Bend, just under 1,100 miles of mostly quiet interstate, cutting across flat stretches of farmland and snow-slicked hills. I've been doing that same run for about 3 years, always through the winter months, and I actually liked it. That probably sounds strange to most people, but when you get used to the rhythm of the road, it feels more familiar than being home. Fewer distractions, fewer surprises. Just me, the truck, and the sound of tires sliding over cold pavement. It happened on a Wednesday night in mid-January. I remember that part clearly because I'd been delayed most of the afternoon waiting on a late shipment in Elridge, and I didn't end up pulling out until nearly 9. That was already pushing it, considering the forecast, but I figured I could make decent time before the weather got bad. I'd done it before. The snow had already started by the time I crossed the Wyoming state line. Not heavy, just a thin, steady flurry blowing sideways across the windshield. The kind that doesn't make you stop but makes you lean forward in your seat a little more than usual. About 20 minutes west of Treston, I spotted a rig pulled over on the shoulder. Hazards flashing slow and steady, casting faint red light into the snow. Pretty normal sight on that stretch. People pull over to check their chains, hit the restroom, wait out a patch of rough road. I slowed down a bit, just in case. It's what we do out there. If it looks like someone might be in trouble, you at least slow down enough to make eye contact. This guy didn't wait for eye contact. He stepped right out and waved me down. No gloves, no hat, just bare hands and a safety vest thrown over a dark hoodie. That set off a flag in my head. I flipped to channel 19 on the CB and keyed the mic. "You all right back there?" His voice came back with a little static. "Battery's dead. No heat. Can you give me a lift to Keldon?" Keldon was still about an hour up the road, not exactly around the corner. I hesitated. I don't usually stop for anyone. Not other truckers, not hitchhikers, not anyone. Too many stories out there. But the temperature was dropping, and if his cab was really dead, he wasn't going to last long in that cold. I sat for maybe 5 seconds, and then eased over to the shoulder. He climbed up without a word. No bag, no thermos, just him and his clothes. Up close, he looked older than I expected. Maybe mid-40s, with pale skin and raw, red patches around his mouth like windburn that hadn't healed. I figured he'd been walking the road a while. He didn't smell like diesel or snow, not even sweat. He smelled like metal, not rust, more like old coins. That sharp, cold scent you get off loose change. I handed him my thermos, still about half full. Coffee for my last stop in Elridge. He took a long sip, then handed it back. No thanks, no conversation. Just sat back and stared out the windshield. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. "You run this route often?" "Every other week," I said. He nodded like that confirmed something. "You know the pull-off where the power station used to be?" I glanced at him. "Yeah, I know it." It was an old service road I'd passed 100 times but never driven down, mostly covered in snow, nothing marked on the GPS except a gray patch of land. The power station was long gone, torn down sometime in the early 2000s, I think. He said, "Turn off there." I blinked. "I thought you wanted to get to Keldon." No answer. He just kept staring ahead. Face blank. After another pause, he said, "There's someone I need to find. Now, I've had weird passengers before. People who sleep the whole way or talk to themselves or try to sell you something in the middle of nowhere. But this was different." He didn't act like someone who needed help. He acted like someone who was already past that point. Still, I kept driving. Figured I'd just get him to town and let him sort out whatever weird mission he was on. But 10 miles later, he pointed again. "There. Turn." It was the service road, half covered in snow, barely visible in the dark. No signs, no reflectors, nothing on my nav screen. I said, "I'm not taking a rig down that. I'll take you to town or call someone." He didn't even flinch. Just said, "You pick me up." You said yes. The way he said it, it stuck in my head. Like I'd signed a contract I didn't know about. It didn't sound like a threat, more like a fact. Like I'd triggered something just by stopping. I checked my mirrors. No lights behind us, nothing ahead. No movement anywhere, just the endless stretch of snow and silence. I told him again, firmer this time, "No, we're not going off-road." He didn't push it, didn't raise his voice. Just sat there, calm as anything, and said, "I've been waiting 4 winters. You're the first one to stop." And that's when I noticed something was off with the floor mat. My boots had tracked in snow, melted puddles and salt crust, just like always. But on his side, dry, completely dry, like he hadn't stepped through snow at all. Like he'd appeared in the cab without ever opening the door. My stomach tightened. I didn't say anything, just kept driving, pressing a little harder on the gas. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared ahead with that dry face and the sharp metallic stink still hanging in the air. After maybe another minute, he leaned toward me real slow. "You missed your turn." I kept my eyes on the road. "We're going to Keldon." He smiled, just a little, lips cracking as they stretched. "No, we're not." Right then, the CB lit up again. "Northbound, you all right?" "You're swerving." I jerked my head toward the side mirror. A rig was gaining on me, fast lights flashing, horn blaring. The driver must have been watching me drift across the lane. The guy beside me turned and said, "Don't listen." That did it. I slammed the brakes. Hard. My trailer fishtailed. I gripped the wheel and fought the skid, heart pounding. The rig behind me honked again, closer now, lights cutting through the swirl of snow. I pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine, and turned to tell him to get out, but the seat was empty. No door slam, no footprints in the snow, just the thermos sitting between the seats, still warm when I picked it up. I climbed down, legs a little shaky. The driver from behind was already walking toward me, bundled in a heavy coat and knit cap. "You good?" he asked. "You were all over the road." I told him what I'd seen, about the guy I'd picked up, about the request to turn off near the old station. His face didn't change much. He just looked at me for a long second and then said, "You're not the first." He jogged back to his truck and came out holding a laminated page. Said he kept it in his cab ever since last winter. It was a newspaper clipping. The headline was about a trucker who froze to death near the old pull-off. Engine failure, no heat. He'd been parked out there during a storm. No one had stopped in time. My name's Lennox. That winter, I was running refrigerated freight out of Spokane, headed for Chicago. It was early December, and the weather was already threatening to turn ugly across the upper Midwest. I planned to make it in 3 days, give or take, depending on how the roads held. The company didn't micromanage us. They just wanted the delivery on time. We routed ourselves, managed our own stops, handled maintenance if anything cropped up. If you drove smart, you could stay ahead of the worst weather, beat the rush, and get a few days of clean highway to yourself. I'd taken Route 84 east and then merged onto I-90, keeping a close eye on the forecasts. A storm system was pushing down from the Canadian border, big, cold, and fast. My thought was simple: stay ahead of it, and I'd be fine. If I stalled, I'd be snowed in for days. And if the load thawed out, it was on me. I rolled into a truck stop just west of Bismarck to fuel up and stretch. The place was maybe half alive, like it used to see heavy traffic, but it thinned out over the years. One pump was bagged, the windows had signs for fresh coffee that looked decades old, and the guy behind the counter didn't even look up when I came in. I grabbed a stale sandwich and a coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since last Tuesday. The air outside was dry and sharp. I remember the kind of cold that bit right through your coat the second you stepped away from the truck. Checked the radar on my phone, blue and purple bands crawling toward Fargo. Sub-zero temps, gusts up to 50. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide whether to push on or pull over. But I figured if I could make Fargo, I'd be in decent shape. At the very least, I could duck into a better stop. So I got back behind the wheel and kept driving. By around 9 that night, I was maybe 15 or 20 miles east of Steele. That stretch of road flat, endless, it just went dead quiet. And I don't mean low traffic quiet, I mean nothing. I hadn't seen a set of headlights in either direction for over an hour, not a tail light, not a reflector in motion, just darkness. Even the CB was quiet. I flipped through a few channels, but all I got was static. No chatter, no weather reports, not even the usual trucker banter you get at night when guys start getting bored and talk about whatever. Just dead air. I figured the storm had pushed most drivers off early. Made sense. Maybe I was the only one dumb enough to keep going. The wind had started to pick up, but visibility was still okay. Light snow, slow, thick flakes. My dashboard showed -12. It looked colder than it felt, but I've driven in worse. Then I saw it. Rest area, 2 miles. White letters, green background. Pretty standard, but I didn't remember any rest area on that stretch. I'd driven this route a few times. It was always just long stretches of nothing until Fargo. I checked the GPS, nothing marked, but sometimes older rest areas don't show up. I figured it might be one of those weird holdovers, something left over from before they updated the highway system. Still, there was something off. The sign itself looked new, no rust, no wear. But the metal post it was bolted to? That thing looked ancient, like it had been eaten halfway through by decades of weather and road salt. The sign and the pole didn't match. Like someone had swapped it out recently, but only halfway. I probably should have kept driving, but I was tired, a little wired from the coffee, and curious. So I slowed down and took the exit. The rest area wasn't big, just a narrow loop with a trash can and a single windowless concrete building. Must have been the bathrooms. No lights anywhere. No vending machines. No signs of anyone having used the place in years. But the lot had been plowed. Not freshly, but recently enough that the snow wasn't knee-deep. I parked the rig near the end of the loop, shut off the engine, and stepped down to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it. Another truck. Barely visible past the tree line, maybe 20 or 30 yards off. The trees weren't thick, just enough to blur the edges of things. But the truck stood out, white trailer, no markings, angled funny like it had slid sideways and never corrected. Its cab door was open, not cracked open. Snow had started to build on the steps, and there weren't any hazard lights on, no sign of the driver. The whole thing felt abandoned. I called out, half expecting someone to respond from the trees. Nothing. So I walked over. There were footprints in the snow, just a few, circling the cab, almost like the driver had gotten out, walked around once, maybe twice, and then stopped. The trail didn't go anywhere. No return path. No drag marks. No signs of a fall. Just 10 or 12 steps that ended 10 feet out. I climbed the side steps and peeked into the cab. It was spotless. Like, eerily clean. Not a single wrapper, no duffel bag, no phone cords or loose change. Just a faint chemical smell mixed with diesel, and one item sitting on the driver's seat. A small black thermos. Plain. No logo, no scratches. Looked new. I picked it up, still warm. Right then, my headlights went out. I turned fast, thinking maybe the battery finally gave out or a fuse popped. But when I stepped down and looked up, my truck wasn't there, not moved. Gone. No tire tracks, no lights, no engine noise. Just untouched snow. My stomach dropped. I ran to where I knew it had been, but there was nothing. No indentations. No warmth in the air. Like it had never been there at all. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not even a flicker. I walked back to the bathroom building thinking maybe it had a heater, a payphone, something. The door opened stiffly. Inside was empty. No stall doors, no power, no graffiti. Just four walls and that smell of cold cement. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. No signal, but there was a message. No number. Don't leave the truck. My heart kicked hard. I stared out into the dark, trying to catch any movement. The lot was still. Trees looked like they hadn't moved in hours. Then another message. You broke the pattern. And a third. You'll have to finish the route now. When I looked up, the white trailer was right in front of me. It had moved. Quietly. No sound, no engine. It was facing the bathroom now. Its back doors wide open. Interior lights on. And someone was standing inside. A figure. Just still. Not moving. Not talking. I didn't wait to figure out more. I turned and ran for the woods. I figured maybe I could find the highway again, or at least get back to a main road. Trees clawed at my jacket. I slipped once and cut my knee, didn't even notice until later. I just kept running until I couldn't hear the snow under my feet anymore. That's when I realized there was no sound. I looked back. There were no tracks behind me. I bent down. My boots weren't leaving prints anymore. That's when I saw them headlights, cutting through the trees, steady, warm. My truck, parked on a narrow road that hadn't been there before. Lights on. Engine running like it had never stopped. I drove. Didn't even slow down until I crossed into Minnesota. I found a distribution center near a suburb outside Minneapolis and dropped the trailer on the lot. Didn't wait for check-in. Didn't say a word. I never told the company what actually happened. Just said the roads were worse than expected and I wouldn't be taking any northern routes for a while. They sold the truck that spring. Back then, I ran solo winter hauls, mostly produce, out of Oregon, cutting east into Idaho, across Wyoming, and then down toward the Texas Panhandle. It was early December, and snow had come in heavier than usual. But I'd driven through worse. Chains were prepped, fluids checked, backups loaded. I'd even gone through the whole truck the night before, leaving compartment by compartment just to be sure. Nothing felt off. Not yet. I didn't notice anything strange until Twin Falls. I'd just pulled into a way station outside town and popped the latch on the sleeper to grab a jacket. It was colder than I expected, and the sun was already dipping low. The first thing that caught my eye was the food crate. It had shifted weirdly. It wasn't tilted or spilled, just slid out slightly, like it had been pulled and then stopped. Then I noticed my tool roll. It was zipped, but not how I usually roll it, tight, methodical. This one looked hurried. Not sloppy, but different. And the bolt cutters I kept under the bunk had moved forward, almost sticking out. I stood there for a second, not really sure what to make of it. I figured maybe the road outside Jerome had more bounce than I realized. I'd hit a couple rough patches. Maybe things just shifted. That's what I told myself. I kept driving. Things got weirder in Utah. I pulled off just south of Kingsley and parked outside an old diner that'd been closed for years. It was one of those places truckers knew you could crash without being hassled. No cameras, no fees, no traffic, just empty space. I made some food in the cab, canned chili with crackers, and set up to sleep. Everything locked, heater on, curtain snapped shut. I drifted off with one arm under my head. At 2 a.m., I woke up freezing, not a little cold freezing, nose burning, knee aching cold. Heater had cut out, which wasn't super rare. I leaned up to check the control panel, and that's when I saw it. The curtain. It was open. Not fully, but halfway across the rail. I don't leave it open. Ever. I'm a creature of habit on the road, and keeping that curtain shut when I'm sleeping is one of those habits. Even parked. Especially parked. I stared at the cab, empty, dead silent, no lights, no movement. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to talk myself down. Maybe I'd unhooked it in my sleep. Maybe the clip just failed. It happens, right? I didn't sleep much after that. Next morning, I went out to check my fluids and do the usual walk around. When I opened the side compartment, I reached for my flashlight, except it wasn't in its holster. It was lying on the floor of the compartment, pointing inward. Like someone had used it and then just set it down. I stood there, staring at it. I hadn't touched that flashlight in 3 days, and I always clip it back in. It doesn't just fall out, not with how deep it sits in the slot. I didn't like it, not one bit. That's when I started locking the sleeper from inside, even during quick stops. 2 nights later, I was nearing Green River when a storm warning came through on the CB. Some older guy with a Colorado drawl came on and told anyone westbound to avoid pushing through Rawlins. Said the wind picked up in the hills and had already tipped a trailer that morning. Light haul like mine? Too risky. I figured he knew what he was talking about, so I pulled off at a gravel turnout just past an old service plaza. No lights, just me and sideways snow. That night was different. It wasn't the cold this time. Heater worked fine. It wasn't sound either. There was no creaking, no rattling, no gusts against the cab. It was silence. Thick silence. The kind you notice because it presses down on you. I was fully awake, lying still, hand wrapped around the wrench I kept beside the pillow. My eyes were on the ceiling, but I wasn't seeing it. I was listening. Not for something specific, just anything. There was nothing. No footfalls, no breathing, no movement. But I knew someone was in the cab with me. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't groggy. I was alert. My heartbeat didn't race. It just thudded in my ears, slow and steady. I couldn't explain how I knew. It wasn't a noise or a shadow or a shape. Just that impossible to ignore feeling of another presence in a space that should be yours alone. When morning came, everything looked untouched. No missing items, no shifted tools. GPS and CB, just as I left them. But when I climbed down to check the tires, I found tracks. Human tracks, not mine. Smaller, different tread. They looped around the cab once and then stopped cold. No vehicle pulled up next to me. No second set. Just one pair of prints in the snow, ending a few feet from my door. I didn't stop again until Cheyenne. At the TA, I parked beside a livestock trailer and went inside to eat. Double-checked all the locks before walking in. Just habit by now. Brought my coffee back to the truck and climbed in. That's when I saw it. On the passenger seat, one of my wool socks, rolled halfway, dirty but not stiff. Not old. I hadn't touched those since the first week of the run. They were buried in the footlocker, zipped shut. I stared at it, then opened the locker to check. Sure enough, the rest of the pair was still inside. I grabbed the tire iron and searched every inch of the truck again, top to bottom. Sleeper, cab, side boxes, storage bins. Nothing. No one. No one. Just me and that sock sitting like it had been casually tossed aside. I was about to call highway patrol when a beat-up pickup rolled in and stopped beside me. Window already down. Guy behind the wheel looked plain button-up shirt, wind-chapped face, nothing memorable. He leaned out and said, "Hell of a cold one, huh?" I gave him a polite nod. Wasn't in the mood to chat. Then he said, "You still park over at that old freight yard by Ellison, behind the grain silos?" I froze. I'd parked there one night months back when I was sick and couldn't push through. It wasn't on any maps. Just an overgrown lot with broken signage and enough space for one rig. I'd never told anyone. Didn't log it, didn't text it. Just slept there one night, sick with a fever. "You a driver?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. He smiled tight, like he knew he'd already said too much. Used to be, that was all. He rolled up the window and drove off like it was just another Tuesday. I didn't move for a long time. The final leg took me across northern Texas. I didn't stop for gas. Didn't eat. Drove through to the receiver, dropped the load 2 hours early, and didn't wait for a signature. I parked at an abandoned lot on the edge of Amarillo, behind a chain fence. That night, I crashed hard. Just shut everything down and slept like I hadn't in days. When I woke up, the windows were glazed with ice inside. My breath hummed thick. Engine wouldn't turn over. Battery dead. I sat up and swung my legs down. My boots were on the wrong mat. They were placed on the left side of the cab. Neatly. Laces looped together like someone had lined them up. I always leave them by the right wall. Always. I stared at them for a long time, then opened the curtain to the cab. One word had been finger-dragged through the frost on the inside of the windshield. AG again. I didn't touch a thing. Didn't grab my keys. Didn't zip my jacket. I got out of that truck, walked 2 miles to the Loves, and never looked back. I bought new clothes off the rack. Used a burner to call a tow. Had that truck hauled and sold off in parts. I flagged the VIN in every registry I could. Told them it was decommissioned. Then I bought a new rig with credit I shouldn't have used. Installed cameras I didn't know how to operate. I mapped every stop I made, documented everything. Photos, logs, times, dates. I stopped driving at night, and I turned down every winter route that crossed into Wyoming. That's how I ended it. My shift at the Municipal Records Annex started at 7, and I was completing the morning inventory when the first irregularity broke my focus. The annex had been understaffed for months, so they'd assigned me to the basement verification room, a place most people avoided because of the cramped rows and the constant hum from the dehumidifiers. I had just finished labeling a set of grant applications when the cabinet to my left eased open by the width of a thumb. It didn't slide from weight imbalance or from me bumping it. It simply shifted out as if someone on the other side had tugged lightly from within the metal frame. I pushed it shut, waited, and then continued working. The cabinet stayed still. I logged the batch, rolled my cart to the mezzanine stairwell, and reached for the clipboard I always kept clipped to the railing. Instead of hanging in its usual spot, the clipboard rested on the top step with a new line of timestamp notes written in my hand. The entry claimed I had already finished the verification cycle for the documents I hadn't even opened yet. I read the note twice, recognizing the angle of my strokes and the narrow spacing I used when hurrying. I checked my pockets to make sure I hadn't absent-mindedly filled it in earlier, but my pen was capped and clean. I went back down and tried to shake it off. The intake station tended to cause overlapping tasks, and I'd made mistakes before. But when I turned toward the shelving unit to start my next cycle, the entire row looked shifted 2 inches to the right, not crooked, relocated. Every cabinet lined up perfectly with the next, as though the whole set had been lifted and placed down in a new position. My cart remained exactly where I left it, the wheels locked and unmoved. I paced the aisle twice, measuring the distance with the usual floor tiles. The count had changed. I didn't bother writing it down. I just returned to my station and kept working. By mid-morning, I carried a new batch of wire-bound ledgers toward the microfiche room. When I reached the entrance, the lights inside were already on, and the chair was angled toward the machine. A fresh fiche strip was loaded into the reader. A printed header above the reel showed my initials and the date. The date matched that morning's, but I hadn't even touched the fiche cabinet yet. I ejected the strip and placed it back in storage, double-checking each drawer to confirm no one else had accessed the system. The sign-out sheet remained blank. I stepped into the stairwell to get some air, but the stairwell door closed behind me before I touched it. The latch clicked with a force that didn't match the way the hinges usually ease shut. I pulled it open again, waited, then let it swing naturally. This time it moved gently. I went back to my station without looking around. When I returned, the binder on my desk displayed a new page of my handwriting documenting tasks I hadn't done. The entries described a complete shelf audit, a hardware reboot, and a delivery sign-off. Each description matched the phrasing I used every day. My signature at the bottom sat at the same slanted angle I'd never taught myself to correct. I flipped back through previous pages to make sure nothing else had changed. All the old entries stayed exactly as I had left them. The building grew quieter as the morning moved on. Usually I heard someone's rolling cart overhead or the courier truck backing into the loading zone, but the silence deepened until its stillness felt unnatural. I checked the time on my logbook. The hands hadn't moved from where they'd been earlier. My phone displayed the correct time, so I assumed the watch battery had died. Before lunch, I went upstairs to return a misplaced keyring I'd found on the mezzanine. I set it on the hook, but when I let go, another identical ring already hung there. Same tag, same mark from where I'd once dropped my own. 2 keys with the same imperfections. I touched each to confirm they weren't duplicates tied to different cabinets. They felt identical. I hung both back and stepped away slowly. Back at my station, the dehumidifier next to the wall flicked off for the first time in weeks. It never turned off during work hours. I checked the power strip and confirmed nothing had tripped. When I turned around, my cart now sat perfectly parallel to the opposite wall, its wheels locked in place. I hadn't touched it. I decided to inspect every aisle to confirm the building wasn't shifting from some structural issue. As I walked, the rows appeared normal until I reached the far corner. The cabinet labeled A17 had swapped positions with A18. The labels were identical in style, but the contents didn't match the inventory. I pulled both drawers and found them alphabetized exactly as I kept them. Someone had moved the cabinets and reorganized each drawer to match my system. I checked for dust lines or disturbances on the floor, but the tile looked uniform. I felt a dry tightness in my throat, something I'd chalked up to the air system, and forced myself to return to my station. When I reached it, the logbook I'd closed earlier was open again. A new line appeared at the bottom of the page: repeat cycle avoided. Do not check mezzanine again. The handwriting looked slightly more rushed than mine, but close enough that my eye recognized the familiar rhythm. I touched the ink and felt a faint warmth, as though it had been written seconds earlier. I left the logbook open and tried to carry on, but the next batch of documents I pulled contained one file I had already verified that morning. The barcode was marked complete, and my initials were recorded twice, one in my usual block letters, one in a looser hand I didn't recognize but which still resembled mine. I checked the system audit log. It showed that I had signed in and out of the microfiche station 3 times during the hour I'd been downstairs. I reviewed the camera feed for the corridor leading there. The footage stalled twice and looped a few seconds before resuming. The frame rate drop happened only when the doorway came into view. Before I could analyze further, the overhead speaker issued a single tone, one short chime, not tied to any alarm or announcement I'd ever heard. The hum of the compressors paused for a breath, then resumed. When I stepped into the hallway, the lights brightened, as if coming out of a dim setting I hadn't noticed before. I made a decision then. I would retrace every point in the annex where things had shifted. Starting in the basement, I verified each shelf, each cart, each scanner. Every station bore marks of my presence that I hadn't made. Check marks in my pattern, notes in my cadence, times matching my habits. The mezzanine called to me with its silent rows, but I remembered the warning scrawled in my logbook. I climbed the stairs anyway. Each step landed with a weight that made the metal grate vibrate. Halfway up, another vibration landed a breath behind mine, each echo matching my movements but not aligning with normal acoustics. The air didn't change, and no one followed, but the pattern stayed consistent until I reached the top. When I pushed open the mezzanine door, the key hooks displayed 3 identical sets. All bore the same slight bend in the ring and the faint scratch near the tag hole. I touched one, then the next, until all 3 hung still. The room felt wrong, not colder or darker, just wrong in the way the layout appeared too perfect, too aligned, too expectant. I left without taking anything. Downstairs, my cart was gone. Not misplaced, gone. I checked every aisle, each corner, the hallway to the stairwell. Nothing. When I returned to my station, the cart stood beside my chair with the entire morning's work arranged in a completed layout. My signature appeared at the bottom of every form. The logbook now contained a final line, "End it by leaving." I didn't collect my jacket or finish the inventory cycle. I shut off the scanner, locked the intake cage with the first key I touched, and walked out of the annex. I didn't sign out at the circulation desk. I stepped into the street, crossed without looking back, and kept walking until the building was several blocks behind me. I just finished a brutal 12-hour run through sleet, black ice, and the kind of sideways snow that makes even seasoned drivers go white-knuckled. It was somewhere past 1:30 in the morning, maybe closer to 2. I pulled off I-94 just past a quiet stretch outside Harlan Ridge. There's a rest area there I've used a few times. Basic concrete loop, old vending machines, those buzzing sodium lights that make everything look yellow. But at that hour, all I cared about was parking, stretching my back, and draining the last of the thermos. The lot was nearly empty, just one salt truck way off at the far end, idling with its lights low. I parked, logged my location on the tablet, and stepped out for a quick walk around. That's my habit. Keeps me sane after long hauls. You check your tires, tap the panels, stretch your legs, and remind yourself you're still a person, not just part of the vehicle. The cold hit fast, dry, and sharp, the kind that clears your thoughts whether you want it to or not. My boots crunched softly over the crust of snow, and for a moment everything felt still. Too still, too still. I climbed back in and flipped open the tablet. Sync lag. Happens all the time in remote spots. Nothing unusual there, but when it finally refreshed, I noticed something off. 2 identical trip summaries. Same origin, same destination, same load. One stacked right on top of the other. The only difference was that the second entry at the bottom had one extra line, exit 73 service station. That made me pause. See, I know that stretch of I-94. I've driven it in the dead of night, in daylight, in rain, in silence, you name it. There is no exit 73. Not there. Between exit 72 and 74 is just a long, uninterrupted span of frozen highway flat land, maybe some scrub, but no turnoffs. No service road, nothing. I told myself it was probably bad GPS metadata. It happens. Sometimes the onboard system hiccups or loads old route data by mistake, but still, something about that name bugged me. Wayrest Fuel and Auto. I didn't recognize it, and I've got a mental catalog of every truck stop worth its coffee between Montana and Minnesota. So I opened the map on the tablet. Took a minute to load, but when it did, sure enough, there was a blinking gray dot exactly where exit 73 should have been. Right in the middle of nowhere. No image. No fuel prices. Just a name. Wayrest Fuel and Auto. I should have stopped there. Let it go. But I didn't. Out of habit, I clicked the More Info button. It gave me exactly nothing. Blank screen. Just the same name and coordinates. So I tried to radio dispatch, mostly to test the line, half hoping someone would pick up and confirm it was just a database fluke. Crackling static. No response. Not even the usual automated ping. Fine, I figured I'd just ignore it. Then I glanced up, and the salt truck was gone. No engine noise. No lights. Just gone. Vanished. And what really got me? The snow around where it had been was undisturbed. Clean. Like nothing had been parked there all night. I opened the door again and looked around. No footprints. No tire churn. Just flat powder, gently drifting like nothing had broken it since the last snowfall. That was the moment my brain tried to split in two, half of it trying to reason through what I was seeing, and the other half quietly panicking. I walked the full loop around the truck, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Everything was in place. No tampering, no weird prints. But when I climbed back into the cab and looked at the passenger seat, my stomach dropped. There was something sitting there. A receipt, folded damp like it had been handled with gloves. The kind of thermal paper that curls and fades with moisture. I picked it up without really thinking and read the print. 1 coffee. 1 pack of jerky. Pump 4. Wayrest fuel and auto. No card number. No timestamp. Just the items. Just the name. I don't scare easily. I've seen breakdowns, accidents, even a guy try to hijack a trailer once. But that little slip of paper got under my skin like nothing else. I threw it out the window. And the second I did, the tablet chimed. That phantom waypoint? Now it was blinking red. A new prompt had loaded, pending delivery, missed check-in. Confirm manifest. I hit dismiss. The screen froze. When it finally came back, the trip summary had changed again. A new message had appeared. Freight drop-off. Wayrest. Overdue by 13 days. I just stared at it. My record's clean. Always has been. I climbed out again, unlocked the side compartment, and yanked the manifest. Everything matched. Every barcode, every pallet, every item. But underneath the copy I always check was a second sheet I hadn't noticed before. Same cargo list. Same ID. But the final line read, final checkpoint, confirm on arrival. And beside it, the exact same coordinates as that blinking red pin. At that point, I should have shut it down, gone to sleep. Called it all a glitch and left it for the techs. But instead, I started the engine. The GPS display flickered, split down the center. One side still showed my planned route. The other, a straight shot to exit 73. And the weirdest part? It said I was only 10 miles away. I don't know why I didn't just back away. Maybe I needed proof I was right. Maybe I just didn't want to be the guy who got rattled by a digital hiccup. Either way, I pulled out, got back on the highway, and started driving east. About 5 minutes later, just past mile marker 71, it happened. The sign. Old, rusted, half covered in frost. Green lettering that looked bleached by time. Exit 73. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. I slowed automatically, merged right, and took the ramp. The road dipped behind a ridge, and the moment I was out of sight of the interstate, it was like the world shifted. Everything got quieter. The snow was falling heavier now, but the road remained perfectly clear. After about a quarter mile, it came into view. A single building, boxy, faded signage. 2 lonely gas pumps under a canopy that buzzed weakly in the wind. The name on the awning, Wayrest Fuel and Auto. It matched exactly. I coasted up next to pump 4. No signs of life, no vehicles, not even a fresh footprint. But there were faint indentations leading from the pump to the side door. Old ones, mostly blown over. I kept the engine running and stepped out. The door didn't slide open when I approached. Just sat there, still. I pushed it manually and stepped inside. It smelled like stale, heat-dry, recycled air. The kind of warmth that comes from an old system left running too long in a sealed room. Shelves were stocked, but coated in dust. Expired snacks. Bottles of windshield fluid yellowed at the edges. And silence. Total silence. I glanced toward the counter. No clerk. Just a little bell sitting alone. Then, I saw the security mirror in the corner. My reflection stood there. But something was off. My jacket was mirrored. The patches were flipped, and then it turned its head before I did. I didn't think. I just backed out and bolted. Back in the truck, I slammed the door and locked it. The fuel gauge now read full. I hadn't pumped a drop. The tablet screen had cleared again. Just one line remained. Exit 73 confirmed. Manifest received. I rushed to the back. The rear doors were unlocked. Cargo looked fine, still strapped down, except for one crate. One lid shifted slightly off. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name, written in pencil. I didn't touch it. I placed it in the glove box and locked it. Then I turned the wheel toward the on-ramp. As I pulled away, the lights at the station shut off. One blink. Total blackness. Total blackness. In my mirrors, the building vanished before I'd even hit the bend. By the time I reached the highway, the exit 73 sign was gone. Just blank snow. Back on I-94, the GPS recalibrated. No sign of the detour, no record of the exit. I made my delivery the next day in Milton, without delay. Manifest clean. Every item accounted for. That night in the motel, I opened the tablet again. One alert. Reconfirm manifest. Route 73 loop. Active delivery required. I closed it, packed up, and went home. Didn't take another haul for 3 weeks. I'd been on the road most of my adult life, hauling freight across the Midwest, sleeping in truck cabs more than my own bed. The work was predictable. A little isolating, sure, but steady. Came through a buddy of a buddy, one of those off-the-books, quiet deals. No manifests, no receipts. Just a name, a pickup point, and cash on delivery. I was told to pick it up outside a little town called Kiever in South Dakota. The guy I met didn't waste words. Said it was sensitive medical equipment. Headed to a rural hospital just past Delling, North Dakota. Tiny place, didn't even show up on half the GPS apps. What threw me was the trailer. It was already sealed when I got there. No branding, no ID numbers, nothing that told you who owned it. Just a big, plain, white dry van. No refrigeration units either, which seemed odd for medical gear. Keep it locked the whole way, the guy said. No stops longer than 15 minutes. Don't open the trailer. No matter what. I raised an eyebrow. He didn't blink. I asked what exactly I was hauling. He just shook his head. Safer if you don't know. At that point, I'd seen enough shady loads to know not to press. I gave the nod, signed a short release form, barely a paragraph, and climbed into my Kenworth just as the sun dipped behind the hills. It was early January, already below freezing, and the wind coming off the prairie had teeth. Maybe an hour in, heading north on Highway 85, the CB gave a sudden crackle. One burst. Static mixed with what sounded like a voice but too jumbled to make out. Just for a second, I reached to turn the volume down and figured it was some stray frequency bouncing off a hill. It happens. Nothing to think twice about. That changed around Leeville. I'd cut east on a backroad, County Route 18, I think, to save time. Stopped at a tiny fuel stop that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Just one pump and a dingy storefront with blinking fluorescent lights. Card reader was down, so I went inside. Guy behind the counter looked like he hadn't slept in days. Late 20s maybe, wearing a red parka that barely zipped up. He watched me the entire time I pulled my card out. Not like I was suspicious, more like I reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. I asked, "You all right?" He squinted a little, then said, "You just came through here." I frowned. "No, I didn't. Came from the south." He didn't respond, just looked at me like I was the problem. Back outside, I glanced at the pump, said it was full. I hadn't even touched the nozzle. I checked the tank anyway. Topped off. No smell of fuel in the air, no stains in the snow. Like someone else had filled it for me. Trailer was untouched. Seal still snug, lock in place. No tracks in the snow behind it either. I shook it off and got back in the truck. Told myself I was tired, maybe hungry. A little further up, maybe near Ridge Hollow, I noticed the side mirrors looked wrong. I've got convex mirrors set to show both rear corners. The left one showed the usual, trailer tires, stretch of road behind me. The right one? Just white. No detail. like staring into a blank screen. I pulled over to check, did the full walk around. Tires looked fine, trailer locked, seal still in place. No damage, no marks. I banged on the side of the trailer just to hear the echo. Nothing unusual. Took a minute to breathe, stretch my legs, then climb back in. The mirrors were normal again. Maybe it was the angle of light, or a patch of snow reflecting weird. Either way, it was getting late and I still had a couple hours to go. Around midnight, the heater started acting up. I didn't notice at first, just figured my layers were doing their job. But then the heat kept climbing. Not warm, hot. Like someone had cranked the dial to max. I turned the controls down. Nothing changed. Turned them off. Still blowing hot. I cracked the window. Cold air poured and stung my face like pins, but the inside stayed just as warm. Like there was something else heating the cab. Then I noticed the smell, faint at first. A dry, musty sort of scent, like old paper or fabric left out too long. Not smoky, not mechanical, just cooked. I pulled off onto a snowpacked shoulder, killed the engine, stepped out. The night was dead quiet, sky full of stars, air sharp enough to hurt. That's when I saw the padlock on the trailer was gone. No scratch marks, no broken pieces in the snow, just gone. Seal was still there though, plastic tag wrapped across the latch, unbroken. I reached for my phone, no bars, not even a roaming signal. CB was quiet too, no hiss, no chatter. Like the air had gone thick. I thought about calling it in anyway, but what would I even report? So I climbed back in, got back on the road, and figured I'd be at the drop in under 2 hours. The sooner I was rid of this thing, the better. Then the knocking started. 3 soft knocks, right behind the cab, inside the trailer. I sat there, not moving, eyes on the road, waiting. Nothing else happened. 10 minutes later, 2 more knocks. I checked the mirrors again. Clear road behind me, snow blowing in little trails across the asphalt. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight and did another lap around the trailer. Everything was still, cold, untouched. Then I saw it. The plastic seal that had been wrapped over the latch. It was lying in the snow, snapped. Clean break, like it had been cut with scissors. The lock was still on the latch, but it looked different. The shackle wasn't fully closed. I didn't open it. I just got back in the cab and turned the heater back up, maybe out of habit, maybe to test something. This time, cold air came through. Didn't touch the controls after that. At some point, I passed a sign, "Welcome to North Dakota." A second later, the GPS shut off. Not glitched, just went black. I blinked, looked up again, and that same sign passed by. Identical. Right down to the crooked post and the dented corner. My stomach dropped. I hit the brakes and pulled over again. Trip meter had dropped by 4 miles. That's when I noticed something move in the passenger mirror. Fast, low like a shadow skipping across snow. I jumped out, swept the flashlight beam across the field. Empty. I opened the passenger door. The seat was warm, real warm. Like someone had been sitting there minutes ago. I don't carry passengers. Didn't stop again after that. 40 minutes later, the facility came into view. A flat concrete building, windowless, with one buzzing light over the door. I parked, shut off the engine, and stepped out. My boots crunched over packed ice. The trailer latch was hanging loose. No lock, no seal. Doors still shut tight, but unsecured now. A man came out of the building. No jacket, just a short-sleeve uniform shirt. Didn't seem cold at all. "You're early," he said. I told him I didn't stop. He just nodded. Walked back to the trailer. Didn't touch it, didn't inspect anything. Just looked at the doors. Then he said, "You should leave now. That's it." I didn't wait, didn't ask questions. I got in the cab, turned the key, and drove. One glance in the mirror, the floodlight above the door blinked out. Not dimmed, just snapped off. The man was gone. I drove straight through the rest of the night. No music, no CB, no thinking, just white lines and silence. By the time I hit Montana, the sun was coming up. I found a way station with a diner pulled in, parked in the far corner, opened the trailer. Empty. No crates. No boxes. No scuffs. Just clean metal walls. No sign anything had ever been there. Inside the diner, I washed my hands for 10 minutes, watched the water bead and roll off my fingers, just trying to feel something. The mirror in the restroom showed my face. Same as always, but I didn't trust it. Felt like it was playing a role I wasn't in on. I got back in my truck that night and drove home. Parked it. Haven't taken another job since. These days, when winter hits, I double-check every door. I was 39 when I picked up a winter freight contract that ran through northern Idaho and into the western edge of Montana. The company had just rolled out these seasonal solo runs. I'd been doing long haul for years, but something about the stillness of those solo winter drives appealed to me. And, let's be honest, the pay was too good to say no to. One night early in the season, I parked outside a small diner in a town called Elridge. You wouldn't find it on most maps, just a scatter of low buildings, a gas station, and that diner with its single neon sign flickering through the snow. I'd gotten in late, and by the time I cut the engine, the snowfall had already gone from light to serious. By morning, the road was basically a slush tunnel. I went inside for breakfast, something hot and heavy to push back the cold, and sat down at the counter. A few seats down, there was a guy already halfway through his meal. He gave me a quick nod when I sat, and after a few minutes, he struck up a conversation. Said his name was Reed. Reed claimed he ran private deliveries for individual clients. Cash only, no manifest, no paperwork. He said sometimes his drop points overlapped with the same truck stops and fuel stations I'd be at. Seemed plausible. He looked clean enough, maybe early 30s, short hair, a worn leather jacket that didn't match the freezing temperatures. I noticed a military-style tattoo on his wrist, something old school. He mentioned that his dad had driven rigs too. Apparently, he'd inherited the truck when the old man passed the previous spring. There was something relaxed about him, like he didn't feel the cold the way I did, or maybe he just didn't care. We ate side by side and kept talking in the lot afterward. He offered me a cigarette even though I'd already said I didn't smoke. I took it anyway. Sometimes it's easier than saying no twice. We stood in the snow, shoulders hunched against the wind, talking about bad roads, cheap coffee, and the usual long-haul complaints. Before we went our separate ways, we exchanged numbers. I figured having someone to check in with during the storm season couldn't hurt. Over the next week, he started texting. First, it was little updates. Heads up, ice patch near Grantham exit, or visibility's garbage pass mile marker 80. Useful stuff. Then it got a bit more casual. He told me his mom lived near a place called Claremont and that he stopped by to help her with groceries and firewood when he had time. He talked about how he'd lost his girlfriend in a wreck the year before. Said the house still felt empty without her, that sometimes the silence got too heavy. I got that. Loneliness hits different on the road. Then around mid-December, he told me about a small run he was doing, just a few crates to a spot near Riston, way up toward the border. He said it wasn't enough weight to justify a full rig, and asked if I wanted to convoy for the last stretch. He framed it like a safety thing. Better to have 2 rigs out there in case anything goes sideways. I said sure. I'd driven that way before. It could get rough in winter, especially after dark. We met just north of Byron, at this truck stop half buried in salted slush. He showed up first and brought me a coffee. Black, no sugar. He also handed me one of those little packs of powdered mini donuts, the kind you find in vending machines. Said his mom used to pack them for him on cold mornings. It was one of those small gestures that felt oddly specific, like a memory he didn't share with many people. We rolled out in sync, him up front, both of us running radios. The route cut away from the main highway and followed a long, narrow service road that twisted through the backcountry. The kind of road that looks like it was paved just enough to technically be legal. Snow was still coming down, and we dropped speed to keep from sliding off the edge. After about an hour, he pulled off into a lay-by. Said his engine temp light had blinked on. I eased in behind him, tires crunching through ice, and let the brakes sigh to a stop. That's when things started to feel strange. He got out, walked back to my cab, and knocked on the passenger side door. Said he was going to let his rig cool off a bit, and asked if he could sit in mine for a few. I didn't see a reason to say no. It was cold and we were in the middle of nowhere. He climbed up carrying a half-empty bottle of bourbon and offered it to me like we were old friends. I took a sip just to be polite. He drank like it was medicine. He noticed the old burn scars on my hand. "Welding," I said. "Back when I still worked maintenance." He nodded, went quiet for a bit. Then out of nowhere he said, "I respect people who've been through real pain. Not like the ones who fake it for sympathy." I didn't really know what to say to that. He didn't seem angry, just focused, like he was testing my response. Then he asked if I thought most people lied about trauma for attention. I didn't answer. He smiled and said, "You're quiet, that's good." Next thing I knew, he was asleep, or pretending to be. His head leaned back against the window, eyes closed, breath slow. I waited a few minutes, then climbed down and went to check his truck. If there was something wrong, I figured I could help. But when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. No steam, no weird smells. Engine was quiet and steady. Nothing to suggest overheating. That's when I saw the paperwork in the glove box. I wasn't snooping, not really. I just leaned in and it was right there. The registration listed a different first name. Not Reed, not even close. I took a quick photo and backed out fast. When I got back in my rig, he was awake again. Still humming that same little tune. He didn't mention the truck or ask what I was doing. Just stared out the windshield and said, "You ever haul near Brenton?" Then a second later, "What's your new employer's address again? That big warehouse off Route 17, right?" I never told him where I worked. That warehouse wasn't on any public manifest. My pulse kicked up, but I kept my face calm. Told him I needed to check in with dispatch about the road. Pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call. Really, I just opened the camera and took a short video of him sitting in my cab. Figured it might be useful later. I told him I was pushing on solo and left without waiting for a response. Drove straight to a monitored lot just outside Nettle Ridge. Pulled into a spot under a floodlight, parked between two company rigs. I didn't sleep much that night.